Ruben Swartz with Sales for Nerds, episode number 3 here with Adam Boyd from MarketSense. He's a certified Sandler trainer. He's going to be talking about the importance of process, how not to talk too much, dealing with rejection and quote-unquote losing, how to be assertive without being sleazy and unhelpful, building good habits, and so much more. Ruben Swartz here from Sales for Nerds, kicking off the Sales for Nerds podcast. If you feel more comfortable with SQL than sales calls, more at home writing test suites than proposals, more interested in crunching numbers than shaking hands, if you think networking should be about routers rather than cocktails with strangers, if you're more interested in debating code editors than negotiating deals, but somehow you ended up responsible for some of those sales and marketing activities, this podcast is for you. I spent a long time learning these lessons the hard way, and I want to help you learn them the easy way by sharing my experiences and talking with other brilliant tech people who figured out how not just to hack code, but the sales and marketing process as well. And today I'm really excited to have Adam Boyd, a partner at MarketSense here in Austin, which is a Sandler sales training firm. So we are going way beyond the normal tech people who happen to know a few things about sales into people who actually do sales coaching for a living. And when I met Adam, I was not necessarily super excited about the introduction because I had a lot of negative preconceptions about salespeople that I was slowly getting over, and I thought sales trainers were probably like even worse than salespeople. And I realized after we went and we had some chips and salsa and some beer that maybe it was my own negative preconceptions that were holding me back, because Adam was a great guy, and he's probably going to tell you how he's not really a sales guy and so on and so forth. But he is a super successful sales trainer. He's the co-author, along with his MarketSense partner, Carl Scheibel, of Succeed the Sandler Way, which, I kid you not, has over 55-star reviews on Amazon. There's like one 4-star review, and all the rest of them are 5 stars. And I'm embarrassed to say that, like so many other books, it's sitting unread on my Kindle. But maybe this interview will help prompt me to go read it finally. Or maybe I'll just take a shortcut and distill as many lessons as I can talking to Adam for you today. In addition to the great reviews, some of the headlines really caught my eyes, like it's disarmingly honest, avoid putting good people in a bad process and then blaming the people when the bad or no process wins, or a great read for any business owner, right? It's not just the typical, yeah, it's a really good read kind of reviews. Adam's an interesting character. He spent a year teaching high school English, is that right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that blog post I wrote about your high school English class ruining your sales proposals doesn't apply to him. He also is a high school football coach, so he really knows about trying to corral people and put them through a process and make them successful. So if you haven't heard the podcast before, it's a little bit different. We not only talk about sales and marketing, we also share a bottle of wine while we do it. And Adam had requested a French wine with relatively low alcohol content. So today we have this, how do you say this, Agerte? I'm going to go with Agerte.
That sounds good to me.
Burgundy Pinot Noir, 12.5% alcohol. The ones I had were 12.5 to 14, so this was at the low end.
Love it.
And I'm going to pour myself a glass here and pour you a glass and say cheers and welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. So one thing that I think is interesting.
That's good.
Yeah, well, let's give it another half hour. We'll see. Hopefully get really good. Right now, it's pretty yummy already.
Yeah.
I think people who come into sales from a non-sales background, obviously they have so many skills that they need that they don't have.
Right.
But they also often don't have a lot of bad habits that a lot of people need to break. And I was curious if you had any thoughts. I know you tend to work with much more experienced salespeople, but for folks who maybe aren't so experienced, can you maybe give them a little confidence boost by saying, hey, here are some of the bad habits that you don't have to break?
So thank you for the introduction. And when it comes to the bad habits, one, there's no one right way to sell. We teach a process, and we believe our process is the best, but most people are going to be fine if they follow a process. What I love about your topic, Sales for Nerds, when I think about where we are, we're here in Central Texas in Austin. We do a lot of work with software companies, and we do a lot of work with services firms.
Right.
The people who love our stuff the most are typically the project managers, the engineers, the architects who end up somehow in sales and using our stuff. And they say, I love it because you've given me a process. And what they had done, their biggest bad habit that everyone from sales to the entrepreneur who is bootstrapping their software company that they run into is they just spend a lot of time educating people.
Okay.
And what they end up doing is talking a ton. And I liken it to a first date. As as guys who we made a great sale and we're both married. Those first dates were really effective, probably because we asked great questions and we listened. And the problem that most people have that they can avoid, but intuitively they don't understand they need to, is they just talk too much about themselves and their product rather than getting other people to talk and discover their own need for it. So that's one that anyone can avoid. It's just really hard because we're so anxious and so excited to talk about what we have and what we do.
I think that's very true, and I know that when I was starting out, I knew I was nervous, and I knew I had sort of my area of technical expertise to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking back, it's really obvious that I was screwing things up by going down into this pit that wasn't necessary at that point in the conversation.
Right.
And the thing that's interesting to me is not only is that really bad for your results, it feels really odd.
Yes.
And if you relax and just are interested in the person, it feels so much better. It feels so much less like sales, yet it leads to more sales.
Right.
Lo and behold.
Well, and that's the challenge because we're conditioned. You and I both have little ones in various stages of school, but we're conditioned from the age of 5 until 18 or 22 to show everybody how much we know. Right. And we go into the working world and we think the way we're going to establish credibility is tell you how much I know and show you how smart I am and educate you on something. And the reality is, very often, the problem your product or service solves, they've not put the pieces together in their head, and you have to help them discover that. And it's more work to ask questions. It's more successful, but we don't get the kudos for, wow, you're really smart.
Right. Until you close the deal.
Yeah, and then your kudo is in the bank. Right? But too often, salespeople, whether they're an entrepreneur, whether they're a consultant, or they're a sales guy for a living, they try to get their needs met on the sales call. And they want people to like them. They want them to tell them how smart they are. But the reality is we just sometimes are best off just asking a lot of questions and kind of playing dumb. They discover it, and boom, they're like, when can we start?
Right. And the funny thing is, for a lot of people, I know for me, with my engineering background, how I got good or whatever at engineering is starting off dumb and asking a lot of questions and being really curious about things, being genuinely curious. Right. And then, like you said, I had insecurities about appearing dumb because I'm supposed to be a professional. I'm supposed to know blah, 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 blah. And something that helps me is thinking about my wife as a doctor, right? She knows all kinds of stuff, but she doesn't go in and just say, I can see you from across the room, I prescribe this. You have to ask the right questions to understand what's really going on. And it's not dumb to ask questions.
No. What's amazing, and what I love about the doctor analogy, actually, we use that in the training quite a bit. A doctor comes in after you've filled out an intake form, after you've spoken with a nurse for a handful of minutes, they've run vitals, they've asked you some more questions that reiterate what was on the intake form, and they ask you the same questions. One, to make sure nothing was missed, but two, to verify. And we never question a doctor's credentials. When a doctor asks, how long has this been an issue? What have you tried? Did it work? Their credibility in our eyes actually goes up.
Right.
So it's a lot of people will say, well, they have MD behind their name. But typically, you're representing a company. And there's a certain credibility that comes from that as well.
Or just from, I think there's sometimes there's such a hurry to be prescribing the solution, but the prospect knows if you don't have enough information. If you're just making something up that's obviously in your best interest to sell versus understanding their problem.
Absolutely.
And I feel like for engineering folks who are supposed to be problem solvers, if they can just relax and let themselves be problem solvers, it actually works out pretty well.
Right. Yeah, and I think one of the challenges, and I'll reiterate this because I don't want our listeners to miss this, is that very often when people show up, to get a solution, they don't realize the extent of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking to people about what MemorN can do, they may not completely realize what they're losing with the way they do it now.
Sure.
So I, for instance, will sit with business owners, VPs of sales, CEOs, and we'll talk about conversion rates. And they've not spent a lot of time thinking deeply about what their current process or lack of results is really costing them.
Mm-hmm.
They're not putting that together. And so what a great, we'll call it sales engineer, can do is help somebody connect those dots.
Okay.
And then they start to realize, oh my gosh, I really am losing a small fortune.
And I like what you're saying there, and just to avoid confusion with, I think, what people think when they think sales engineer, they're like the demo jockey.
But I'm thinking anybody who's selling, you're really engineering something. You're engineering, you're building a case, and helping that person come to the conclusion that you're the right person to solve their problem.
You're helping the prospect engineer a solution in their own mind.
Right.
And
what you want to do is uncover that solution rather than say, here's the solution you need.
help them create it. Just guide them along the way.
Yeah, and they'll see what you're doing. You're going to build a case for your product or service. But it's really, we're a big advocate that you want, in any situation, to be talking 30% of the time and having them talk the rest of the time, right? And some people think, wow, you're really not going to be showing them how intelligent you are. If you're with somebody for an hour, you're talking for 18 minutes.
Which is a lot of talking.
It really is. It really is.
Meta point here, right, is I'm like, let me ask some more questions because I want to hear you talk, right? I'm not here to hear myself talk. I can do that anytime. And I think that's another thing that people get confused about. I know I did when I started having to do sales. I thought I was supposed to stand in front of the room and talk and tell people what was going to happen.
Right.
And I was.
Right.
Just not yet.
Right.
Because I didn't know yet what the solution was because I was in such a rush to get there. It's a very kind of Zen thing, right?
Yeah.
Like the faster you go, the longer it takes to get there, or you may never get there.
It's funny you say that. Our data shows us when we evaluate organizations, we look at the salespeople and their capabilities. Most of them are strongest in the presentation stage because they've internalized that. Years and years and years ago, they used to have these flip charts they'd carry with them.
Right.
And now we're really reliant on decks. And in software technology, people rush to the demo because that's what they've practiced and rehearsed and become really good at. In fact, I was reading an interview with, I think, the VP of product or marketing at a Fortune 1000 company, who receives a lot of solicitations from salespeople every day, both by email and some by phone. They're not quite as much by phone, despite what people think. And he said, the problem is people are too reliant on their decks. He said, I really want to find someone who's going to come in and can sit down and have a conversation with me. Because if they can't do that, I'm really not going to give them a lot of credibility and give them a lot of time. But that's the thing that people struggle with, is just sitting down and having a conversation with somebody.
Because they've talked themselves into that problem, is my theory.
I think that's part of it. The other part is it's ambiguous.
Right.
And we go back to, we talk about engineers. And if I could go back and do it again, I probably would have studied engineering. I don't know if I'm intelligent enough to have gotten through it.
Believe me, you are.
But the people I know whom I, for the most part, respect the most in business have an engineering background. Because they think through a process and they have a way of attacking problems. But what happens is you give someone a framework for managing a conversation and show them what to look for and they can handle it. But a presentation's easy.
Right.
I internalize this, I say this, and I make these points. But if you and I have this conversation, I didn't know the questions you were going to ask today. Right? You didn't know what I was going to say. We just have to be able to kind of work off of each other. And for a lot of people, that's scary.
It is. It's very scary, and you don't necessarily know what the outcome's going to be. You can't control it ahead of time, which is a problem. But I feel like there are a few things that you can do that maybe don't give you complete control, but give you enough sense of control to be comfortable. And I know you guys spend a lot of time on that. What are some of the things that you would recommend for people?
Well, there are tactics, and honestly, those are easy to teach if people are open to those. I'm a bigger believer that it's our mindset and our attitude going into a conversation that makes that conversation easy.
Okay.
So let me give you an example. One of our rules or our mantras is you can't lose anything you don't have. So a lot of times people are worried that they're going to lose a deal. They're going to say something that's going to upset someone. They don't have a deal yet. If there's no deal on the table, you can't lose anything. It's not like losing a customer.
Right.
And so we want people to feel free going in to a conversation to say, look, you don't have it. You need to ask these types of questions. These are the things you need to uncover, even if you don't want to hear the answer.
Right.
This is what you need to do. So I really focus more on what do you need to know mentally that will give you the freedom to ask the questions. The other thing that we do is we give people a series of questioning tools. And what happens when we initially teach this, people are hesitant to employ it. And even your listeners today will say, well, that's being evasive or being dodgy. But I disagree. So if you ask me a question and I don't fully understand what you mean by the question, why you're asking it, or your intention in that question, I need to ask you for clarity.
Okay.
And in Sandler, we call that a reverse. So if somebody says, can you do X, I'm going to ask, can you tell me why that's important to you? Now what will happen there is they may just say, answer the question, maybe 2% of the time. But the vast majority of the time, people are going to give me additional information that will open that question up, and now we're going to have a better conversation.
Right.
I saw this in business school. I had a great teacher, and you would ask a question, and the way he would reframe it, he would say, are you asking X or Y? And 70% of the time, people would actually come up with Z.
Right.
They redefined it because they were forced to be tighter in their definition and their communication. So when people are in a conversation, I encourage them just to kind of force the conversation along. People get scared because remember, think about your kids. What grade are your children in? Fourth, all right. So a fourth grader's asked a question. Sally, what's 4 times 4? She's going to raise her hand and say 16. The teacher's going to pat her on the head. Well, Sally doesn't say, hey, why are you asking?
My kids might.
Your kids might.
If it involves bedtime,
then sales is the future for this one. So if you think about it, we go into sales and we're so eager to tell people what we know and answer the questions. We don't question, why is that question even being asked?
Right.
So I'll give you a great example. Later in a conversation, let's say the process have moved forward to discussing price or numbers or looking at a proposal. Very often people will say, hey, your price is really high. Okay? Now, some people get scared when they hear that. Someone just said your price was high. You know, the last time I checked, Maseratis have a high price as well. The people that buy them know that and are okay with it. One of the things we've trained salespeople to do is to reverse that and say, hey, you must be bringing that up for a reason.
Right.
And we've got real life examples of buyers saying, I just want you to know your price was high and stroking the check. They're not dropping their pants. They're not cutting price. So some of this is a mindset. I want to go in. I want to be curious. I have rights. I can't lose this. The other piece is tactically, how do you get yourself out of binds and keep yourself from being boxed in or just being the dog playing fetch? A lot of times salespeople end up in a game of fetch and somebody says, can you do this? Fetch. Go get that information.
Right.
How would you solve this problem? Fetch. Tell me, can you provide this extra feature? Fetch. And lo and behold, what they're really doing is beating up the incumbent by saying, this guy over here can do it. And we just never ask, hey, why is that important to you?
Or what if we could free consulting, right?
Right, yeah. And if you're going to do free consulting, you're going to have skinny kids.
Which, a whole separate conversation. Mm-hmm. But so you raised some great points, and I think some of those traps are especially problematic for the people coming from that more technical background, because they are programmed to go solve a problem. They are like the retriever. You throw the tennis ball, and they go get it. They bring it back, and then they pant at you, and they look at you with puppy dog eyes, and then they wonder why they're not getting a treat. Right. And instead, the ball gets thrown again and again and again. Right. And at the end of the day, you've just worn yourself out, and whether or not you had that deal, you've given up a tremendous amount of opportunity. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, you got to go in knowing you have rights. Right. And I'm guessing that kind of ties together with how you handle this go fetch situation. What do people do in that case?
Well, the beginning of the any sort of process, one of the things we train people to do is set a ground rules or upfront agreements on how we're going to interact. And if someone was sitting down to sell you something that we had worked with, we'd tell them to say, hey, Ruben, you're going to have questions. I've got a lot of questions also. Are you okay if I ask questions? So we get permission up front, and we get permission to ask those questions. So one, it frees up the seller to feel comfortable asking questions. Two, it primes the buyer to know I'm going to be asked questions. So that's one thing we do. So at the very beginning, we say, look, I'm going to be asking you questions. Two, we really have to work hard at helping that seller know, whether it's a sales engineer who's been brought on board or some sort of technical resource or even the salesperson. Look, when they ask questions, you need to find out why. Hey, if you ask and we do this, I need to ask, hey, how do you see that helping you? Is that important? Why? So that they don't just, I'm not giving away my cookies for free.
Right.
So I've got to find out what's important, and that constantly takes the conversation in a new direction that's richer and more meaningful. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it really ties into my first experiences in quote-unquote sales when I was still a programmer by title. Right, they would bring me out to answer the technical questions. And people would ask, can you do X?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I learned just to say yes, because usually we could.
Right.
And then they say, well, how do you do it?
Right.
I don't want to just be BS by some
Right.
sales guy. And then I'd say, well, there's 6 different ways we could do it, and here are the pros and cons of each. And a half hour later, everyone was like, oh, well, I
Right.
believe they can do it, but
Right.
please make this guy stop talking. and I think what you're saying about understanding the real reason for
Right.
the question, like it's not just me playing a sales game with you. It is
Right.
me legitimately trying to solve your problem as
Right.
best I can, or saying I can't. Let's not go down this avenue.
Right. And one of the things that is important for people to understand is sometimes they're asking the wrong questions. Sometimes they don't know the right questions to ask. And sometimes they are going to use you for information.
Right.
And you've got to be careful and know how to manage that because, so I deal with business owners, CEOs, presidents, salespeople. All of them have options with what they can do with their time. Not every prospect is qualified to be a customer. They don't all deserve our time. So if you and I are working on our business, it needs to be on the things that are most valuable. And we can be putting our time elsewhere, focusing on other prospects, dealing with our customers, working on product, or, hey, lo and behold, maybe spending time with our families.
Right.
Right? There are other things that... So what I want to do is qualify, hey, are you serious? Before I sell to you, before I give you all my knowledge, which is valuable, which is the most valuable thing we have,
Right.
we need to find out, are they serious?
So how do you do that?
Well, we believe that people buy emotionally. And we're trying to peel back the onion to find out what's motivating people. So I don't know how many RFPs you get. I know you kind of help solve some of the proposal problem for people. But I've got a lot of clients who get a lot of proposals. And when they calculate their win rate on the proposals they respond to, before we start working together, it's pretty low.
Right.
But the cost of proposals, I've heard anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 to $50,000 responding to a proposal.
Right.
So one of the things we do is we help them understand that a lot of RFPs, when they go out, if it's unsolicited, very often the buyer has chosen the winner before it even goes out.
Right.
They're just following a process to keep somebody happy. Right.
And
So they got to get
some
three
other
bids.
consultant making even more money running the RFP process.
Right. So one of the things that we do is we say, look, before you respond with your proposal, you need to get access in return. If they won't give you access to people with information, you need to ask yourself, is this really worth your time?
Right.
Before you tie up the engineers, the consultants, the solution architects, before you go on site, spend a lot of money responding to this thing that looks like a Charles Dickens novel,
Right.
you need to find out, are they serious? If they're going to give you information, you might be a player. If they're going to say, no, all the information's in the RFP, you got to ask yourself, is it really worth it? Are we really going to win it?
And if you're listening to this right now, I'm embarrassed to say this took me about 5 years to learn. So just listen to that, and you will save yourself so much time and worry and unwarranted euphoria over this big RFP you're about to win.
Well, and what happens is, one, let me commend you that you've gotten there significantly faster than a lot of people. A lot of big companies, they're in business and they're making money, but they still do it this way. But when there's an RFP that comes through, and I don't know how many people are listening deal with RFPs, but very often the price tag is larger than all the other deals they're working on.
Right.
And so they put that in the pipeline, and it just inflates all the numbers, and we feel really good about that. Really what we need to be doing is figuring out how do we get more people in that are singles and doubles? Because we're more likely to win those. It's easier to manage. We have more visibility to what's going on, and we're not going to get as emotionally involved.
Right. Or if it is a potential home run or grand slam, is it really an opportunity?
Right.
Or are you just there
Right.
for part of the dog and pony show?
Right. And I find that a lot of people, I've seen people actually give a buyer a ton of information, and then seeing that proposal they put together shopped out.
Yep.
I mean, it actually became the playbook that they ran. And
Hey, that's a good idea. Let's
see what it will cost other people to do it. And it's just heartbreaking for those folks. But you've got to be on guard against buyers because they're going to take your time. I'm going to sound like a jerk to a lot of people on this, but I tell people up front, I say, look, I'm really bad at writing proposals. The only way I'm going to do one is we agree ahead of time as to what goes in there. And now that's my sale. That's part of my process because I'm not working weekends for someone. I got wife and kids, and unless they want to pay me to do the proposal,
right,
it's going to happen within a time frame that makes sense, and we agree on what's going to happen next. Because I had early in my career done too many proposals, night, weekends. Rushed it to get them to them on Monday morning because that's when they need it. And they said, oh, well, we're not going to talk about this for 2 to 3 more weeks. And 6 months later, you're chasing, and you've lost all dignity.
Okay, well, it's in some weird, terrible human being kind of way. I'm happy to hear this has happened to you as well.
It happens to everybody. It really does. And, it's funny. You mentioned some things. There are people who are sales machines. They love to network. They love to prospect. I got to tell you, I went to a networking lunch today, and I still get a little uncomfortable when I'm there, but I make myself do it because I need to do it. I had to make prospecting calls this morning, and I don't love doing it. I have to talk to myself the right way, and fortunately, by virtue of the work we do, I've got some skills and tools to do it, but I still don't get excited about it. I still get uncomfortable, but I can fake it long enough to get it going.
Okay.
So it's I don't know that it ever goes away. There's a great book called The War of Art. Have you read that?
I have not.
Stephen Pressfield.
Okay.
I recommend everyone read The War of Art. This is phenomenal, real easy to read, real fast. And he talks about just a lot of times success is just overcoming resistance, that thing that says, don't do this. And I think when most of us go to sell, the resistance is it's what wants to keep us from actually going out and talking to prospects, talking to customers.
Sure.
It's that discomfort.
And do you think it's fear of the conversation itself? Is it fear of rejection? Is it a bit of both? Something else?
I believe we're so trained to focus on avoiding failure. And prospecting is, for the most part, majority failure.
Right.
We're so trained to avoid that because of how it reflects on us from our upbringing, school, whatever, that we just avoid it because we don't want it to turn out poorly. Think about this. It's going to sound like I'm knocking education, but you are probably a great student, right? And you may have been one of those students who, if your grade was below 85, wanted to negotiate with the teacher and... Right. When I taught, I had that, right? It was always the kids who were like, their average was 99. If they got a 98, they wanted to argue with me. But
no comment.
Most of selling on the front end is going to be failure. It's more akin to baseball where we're batting 300 than we're batting 1,000.
Right.
And that's really hard for a lot of people if we can't be okay realizing, most people probably aren't a good fit for me.
Right.
But I need to talk to them because there's 1 out of 20 who is, and I got to go find that one person.
Right.
So that's why I believe it. I think there's just we're going to fail. We don't like that. We don't know how it makes us feel. We don't like what we fear it says about us or our business.
And it's interesting because that baseball analogy is a great one. I mean, I was not a good baseball player. When I was really in elementary school, I was really short.
Yeah.
So I played leadoff because the pitchers couldn't throw strikes, and I would
great.
walk every time.
That's great.
Or I'd strike out. If they could throw strikes, I was doomed. But generally, I would walk, and then the wild pitches, I would just go around the bases. It was fantastic. And then when I grew, I was in really big trouble because I couldn't hit the ball. But, this is a sport where, like you say, if you do something successfully 30% of the time, you're amazing.
Right.
And everyone accepts that. And it doesn't mean you're not stressed out when you're up there at the plate, but there's no shame in striking out and getting out and so on and so forth. And everyone knows that sales is the same way.
Yeah.
But somehow it's not nearly as fun as baseball.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like we have so much more anxiety about it, and I sort of have this theory that in baseball, because everyone knows the statistics, it's very easy to say, I'm doing okay, or I'm improving. Whereas sales, it's so hard to make an apples to apples comparison. Mm-hmm. You always feel like you're about to get fired, basically.
Right.
Or your business is about to go under.
Right.
Or there's some other guy who's just way better than you. Right. It's not like 300 versus 320. It's like 300 and someone else is batting 950 or something ridiculous. And I don't know if that's actually true, but I sort of have this theory that because it's so opaque, we internalize all those negative feelings about it.
A great confirmation of that is most of the CEOs and presidents I talk to want to know what industry standards are.
Right.
And they're a $5 million business in some niche, and they're looking for something that's apples to apples. And it rarely exists.
But it's natural for them to want to know.
Yeah, they want to know, right? How do I stand out? And the thing about sales is I don't play golf. I've played golf once in the last 4 years. People will ask me to play, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to spend $100 to walk around outside and have you kick my tail. But in golf, the people who play it are really just competing with themselves, like the people who really get it. And sales is the same way. One of the things I love about sales is you're always able to learn and grow and get better. You're never going to leave and say, that was a perfect sales call. Mm-hmm. There's no perfection there. There's just a chance to get better and learn and grow. And if we can take that mindset and realize, man, I got better. I took some risks. I did something I hadn't done before. I asked a tougher question. I pushed a little more on a certain point, and I realized I wasn't going to die. And what we find is we actually start winning more. But sometimes here's what's even better. We get out of the opportunities we're not going to win fast. And frankly, I would love to see more people take off early, go fish, go spend time with their kids, go do whatever they want to do, and spend less time working on a proposal or chasing a deal they're not going to get. But it's baseball might be a little more fun. Sports always are, and there's always this terrible analogy between sports and sales, and it doesn't hold up because there's no one cheering for you when you're selling, right? If you're calling on somebody, there's not a stadium chanting your name, right? Even when you got like minor league or semi-pro football, people show up to those games.
Right.
Not the same in sales.
That's a very good point. And maybe we should have some kind of pre-recorded thing on your phone, right? The sound of Yankee Stadium or whatever.
That'd be great, right?
You raised a very interesting point that I know that I had trouble with, and I know a lot of my customers have trouble with, which is that notion of I've kind of stuck something in the pipeline, and now it looks like I've got stuff in my pipeline,
right?
Or I've got more stuff in my pipeline than I really do, and I can't seem to make it move. Yeah. But I don't want to take it out and say no, partly because I'm scared to make my pipeline smaller, but also partly for legitimate reasons, which is, I don't know how to disqualify them. I don't want to give up. Right. But I've read all these things that the sales close after the 12th call or whatever. How do you do a better job? You mentioned your time and just generally knowing what's really going on. How do you qualify people sort of to bring them into the funnel and then as they go through?
Yeah. So one of the areas that I've seen some improvement with sales organizations over the last 5 or so years is more of them are installing a sales process. Now, everyone says they have a process, but the process is usually based on events. We have a call, we do a demo, we set a contract, we negotiate. Those are events. Those aren't actual milestones. So let me give you an example. A milestone might be someone says they're committed to solving the problem. Now, just imagine the power of that. You sit down with someone and they say, "Hey, I have a problem with conversion rates," and you ask, "Well, how important is this to you? It's really important. Well, how committed are you to solving the problem? Say, look, I'm going to do something. The question is with whom. If you have that piece of information from a buyer, I'm going to do something.
Right.
It now increases the odds that that deal is going to close, right? Now, it increases more when they tell you, I want to work with you.
Sure.
Right? Let's figure out the details of the solution. Very few people say, do you want to work with me? Right? They just say, let me know if you need help. Right? Let me know what you want to do next. Very few people uncover what's called a compelling reason. In Sandler, we refer to it as pain, but a reason they have to act. I'll give you an example. I work with a lot of people, maybe they're in financial services or insurance, and someone will say, I should do something, I need to do something. And I'll ask the salesperson, how important is this? They say, well, it's important. How do you know? Well, they told me they needed to do something. Yeah. But if they say it was a real problem, and if they don't do something, there are consequences they can't live with. Well, no. Well, that's what you need to go find out. And so very often when deals are stuck, I tell people to call the prospect up and say, hey, you know what, we've not talked in a while. I'm not even sure if we're supposed to be doing this. Can you help me understand why we're talking and what problem you really want to solve?
Or if we should stop talking.
Right, exactly. Give them
Save
freedom.
everyone time.
And what happens is everyone has this belief that if I ask that question, they're going to realize they may not want to talk to me.
Hallelujah.
Right. And the reality is most of them, they have a reason for talking to you. If you don't need that in your pipeline, let's find out. Let's get out of there.
Right.
But let's just go back and say, hey, look, what were you trying to solve? Can we talk about that and spend a few minutes on that? And find out because there's a fine line between being persistent and being a pest. And I need to know if I'm crossing that line.
Sure. And a lot of people will say, I think for most of us, especially coming from this non-sales background, the problem is being persistent enough.
Right.
And so that's sort of like the first hurdle to get over, I think, psychologically for most people. It's just a different mindset about how often you need to call people and what you need to do and so on. And having so many people thank me for following up was so helpful for me psychologically.
Let me tell you a quick story. I've got a client. They're in the CRM space. Not too much.
We all have to drive home. I think we got folks who can finish this if we need help.
Okay, good.
I've already got some volunteers.
Good. Well, let's take care of them. I work with a company that we've worked together probably 4 years now. Great company. The CEO reached out to me via email. He said, so-and-so said we should talk. I need some help looking at my team and figuring out what they need to do to get better. And, it's been great. We've seen them grow sales probably 30% in the last couple of years. And I remember I called him back, got nothing. Emailed him back, got nothing. Called him back, emailed him back. At the end of this whole charade, I probably emailed him 3 times and called him 4 times before he called me back. And his message when he called me back was, thanks for being persistent. I've been really busy. The data tells us, everybody who does these reports says it takes approximately 8 or more attempts to reach someone. Think about how often you're at a desk or even able to answer your cell phone.
Right.
Think about all the emails you get. And you just don't have time to get to everyone. There are people that I'm meaning to talk to. I've got an event I'm speaking at in November, and the woman emailed me on the 8th. And I just finally got back to her today, and some people are going to question my punctuality on that. Right. But it just got buried in the email, right? And I'm one of these guys who's not doing email at 10 o'clock, right?
Right.
So there's a piece of it that's just, you've just got to do the work. And I tell a lot of our clients, I say, I know you're worried about what they're going to think about you, but you don't have to do Thanksgiving dinner with them. They're probably not going to be at your child's wedding. They're not going to be at your funeral. It's a potential customer. Nothing more, nothing less. So just be persistent, and they'll get rid of you if you want. Now, one of the things that I read recently, there's this popular term called ghosting. Are you familiar with this?
Where you just leave.
Yeah.
I'm all about it.
Yeah, well, but what happens is people say that they're doing it to salespeople now. They're just ghosting. They're saying, well, I'd rather not tell them no. I'm just going to ignore them. Well, how frustrating is that?
Right.
Somebody wanted a demo from you. They wanted a proposal, and they changed their mind. So rather than say, hey, no, Rupert, I'm not interested, they're just going to disappear.
Right.
It's just not courteous.
Right.
But in their mind, they're thinking, well, I don't want to tell him no, so I'm just going to lead him on, and he's going to keep calling me forever. So I think it's only fair game to call those people until they feel like they have to tell you no.
Right.
So.
And most people will. I had someone tell me this morning, a guy who signed up for a trial a couple of weeks ago, never responded in an email or whatever, and then finally this morning he's like, unsubscribe, one word.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is a personal email that I sent him, and I thought 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that would have just ruined my day.
Yeah. It's just one more guy.
And I was like, that's great. I'm so happy he did that minimal frustration, and now we can both save time. We're done.
And it's important to separate the role you play as a seller. And this is not all you do. You've started the company, you developed it, and you run the business. But one of the things you do is you sell.
Right.
It's a role you play. And if you don't have success, it doesn't reflect on you as a person. Right? So just because one person didn't buy or I didn't run a great sales call, that's not who I am. It's just part of the role I'm playing there.
Well, it's like if you play baseball and you didn't hit a home run with every single swing, doesn't mean you're a terrible baseball player.
No, or a bad person.
Right.
Right? Which is where I think a lot of us get hung up.
That's a great point.
Forgive me, allergies. But you go to a party, and in this country, everyone says, hey, Ruben, what do you do? That's the first thing we ask. And so if you're selling for a living or even part of what you're doing, we're deriving self-worth from the work we're doing.
Right.
So and if you had a crappy month selling or a crappy day, I'm a sales guy, right? And you feel bad.
Well, I think especially for a lot of entrepreneurs who have a technical background and they come into sales,
right?
So much of their self-worth really is tied up with not just their product and their financial success, but sort of with their mission to make some kind of dent in the universe.
Right.
And so every time someone says no to that, it's not just like they don't just take it as a no to this particular part of my pipeline. It's like no to my view of how the world should work.
Right.
And that is hard for a lot of people to take, as opposed to just there's more out there who are maybe a better fit.
Let's just get away from this one and move.
It's not. I think that's one of the great things about the internet and this age that we live in. If you're in a village or even 50 years ago, you had to get in your car and drive around and just visit a very finite set of people. Mm-hmm. And if too many people said no to you, you were done.
Right.
Because that was it.
Right.
Or you'd have to move.
Right.
Right now, if there's a bunch of people who say no to you, there's 7 billion other people in other places, some of whom are likely to be a better fit.
Right. And there are people being born every day.
Right. Yeah. Not coming up on 9 billion is my understanding. Now, so I think, are there specific tips that you would give to people who are saying, okay, I get it. I'm supposed to make all these calls. I'm supposed to make however many it is. But I don't want to, I get it, so many calls. Hey, I'm just following up from my call of whatever. I'm like, I don't even know who you are.
Right.
Even if I wanted to have some interest, this is like another of 10 other emails or voicemails I got today from somebody following up.
Right.
So what are you supposed to do when you follow up that doesn't sound like you're just following up?
One, don't say you're following up.
Great.
So I talk to people all the time, and they say, I can't get this person to call me back. I say, well, let's just walk through what you're doing or saying. Tell them I'm just following up, and I want to find out where the deal is. Well, who's that about? It's all about me. I'll tell you a quick story. My wife mentors some young women, and one of them came to our house one day. We were living in a little condo and small space, and this young woman came over and wanted my wife to bake a cake for her boyfriend. And not my wife's boyfriend, this young woman's boyfriend.
Just to be clear.
Right.
Still a pretty good deal for this gal.
Right. So I step out of the room, and I go in the other room, and I think I popped up and watched Pacific Rim on my computer. It's an entertaining movie. I'll leave it at that.
My wife loves that movie.
Does she really?
I think it's so silly.
It's pretty ridiculous, but cool at the same time. So my wife at the time was approximately 7 months, some change, pregnant with our second
child. Now, this is still your wife, right?
Still my wife.
You're just at that time, not your wife at the time.
Right.
With her boyfriend. Just so we're clear.
Yes.
This is the wine talk.
Her boyfriend who, my life insurance is going to go to pay for. So my wife, who's 7.5 months pregnant, she's got a 1.5, 2-year-old hanging on her legs. And this young woman is there for my wife to make her a cake. So the young woman, Erin, my wife, had said, she's having a hard time with some of her friends. When she left, and I'd overheard some of their conversation as I was watching Pacific Rim, I walked in, I said, hey, I think I know what the problem is. She said, what do you mean? I said, she never once asked you a single question about yourself. She made it all about her. And I said, that's her problem with all her relationships, is she shows up to people and just takes. So I'm not advocating that all these people who are listening just show up and call people and dump on them. But they have to have a reason that's about the other person. So let's pretend a deal's stuck. And you know that people are spending insane amounts of money on proposals and the deals are taking too long to close and they have no insight into it as to why. So when you call people, say, hey, Bob, it's Ruben. We haven't spoken in a while. And I knew that there were some challenges with some conversion rates and you were spending a lot of these proposals. Is that something that we should even be talking about? Rather than say, hey, I'm just following up to find out where the decision is for you to put money in my pocket.
Right.
Right. Not that you do that, but it's what it comes across as.
Yep.
Now, somebody's got to call on someone who downloaded a white paper. I tell people, don't say, hey, I'm following up on the download. I might call and say, hey, I see that you or someone using your email hit up on our website and was looking for information. Do you know anything about this?
Right.
So it disarms the person. And a lot of times they're not expecting your call. They're scratching their head. And they're wondering, did I download that? Did I not? And you can have fun with them and maybe say, well, maybe somebody hacked into it. Ed Snowden's want to know about, who knows. And then say, hey, look, the purpose of my call is to find out if you got what you needed. And then we start a conversation. And so one of the big keys is looking, sounding, feeling different. Most of these calls sound really scripted.
Yes.
And we just have to kind of humanize them a little bit.
And I feel bad because there's all these good folks in India making a great living for India, making a lot of these calls. And I'm not trying to pick on them specifically, but there's so many calls I get these days where it's somebody who has English as a second language,
right,
who's reading the script,
yes, and
stumbling over some of the words,
right,
and kind of like, I'm sure this must be working at some level,
yeah,
but
on a volume level, it works.
Sure. And I don't even care that you have an accent and that you're calling from India. I care that you know nothing about me. It's kind of like your wife's friend who wants her to bake a cake when she's 7 months pregnant to impress her boyfriend.
Yeah.
And that's a great analogy for the stereotypical salesperson that we all hate.
Right. And I don't think you have to do a ton of research on people, because if somebody hits your website and downloads something, requests a demo, I don't expect you to do 20 minutes of research.
Right.
But, let's have a way to enter the conversation that humanizes it and say, let's lead with a question. Hey, don't know, I saw that someone using your information downloaded a white paper, requested a demo. Do you know anything about this? Yeah, I do. Okay, tell me what you're looking for. Right now we got them engaged. It's sort of like most cold calls are someone just steamrolling us with information, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm getting sucked into a black hole of time. I'm never going to get out. Let's just say, hey, look, do you have 2 minutes to talk about this, and we can set up a time to demo the product.
And I think, something that you said just kind of interesting is we all get a lot of these calls too.
Right.
And most of them are terrible.
Right.
So
the bar's low. So I want your listeners to know the bar to be good is low.
But some of them are actually really good.
Right.
Even the ones that you don't necessarily want to buy that, but the people clearly are doing something different. And so something that I've been trying to do, not that I have a ton of free time, but every once in a while I remind myself, hey, this person's really good. Let me listen to what they have to say. Yeah. Because they're different. I actually kind of want to talk to them, even though I don't have this problem. Right. Let me just see how this plays out.
And you never know when they're going to be a resource for you.
Right.
Right. Most people aren't networked enough. And until you get incredibly busy on the right things, it's important to develop those resources. You never know where that person's going to be and how they might be able to be a resource for you later.
And even if they can't, I think for a lot of people who suck at making these calls,
learn.
Just getting an example of, hey, it doesn't have to sound so terrible.
Right. Yeah. I just tell people, laugh. If you need to, have a glass of wine before you jump on the phone.
Right.
Right. Just take all the pressure off of it. Maybe I should go make some calls after this. If I didn't have 1,000 other things to do, I'd probably go. I'd already made mine for the day, but this is a great time to do it.
I've actually got a guest who I don't have scheduled yet, but is going to be on board, and they had a thing where to make calls to internal people at their own company, they had to have a glass of wine because they were so nervous to pick up the phone.
That's hysterical.
You are the far end of the spectrum. That's going to be a great thing for people to hear about.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just glad they're picking up the phone. Most of these millennials, everything's by email.
Or, not even email. That's too old-fashioned.
Yeah, it's text. Snapchat. Ruben, I'm going to Snapchat you directions.
Part of, I think, the challenge that people have, especially when they come from a non-sales background into sales, there are all these preconceived notions that I kind of alluded to at the very beginning of the introduction.
Yep.
Right? And we've all encountered terrible, sleazy salespeople, and it's sort of become popularized in the culture, and it's entrenched in the mindset. And a lot of tech people have really been burned by some of these people, right? The sales guy goes and makes all these promises, collects his check, and then someone else is on the hook for it.
Yep.
And so these people, when they start their companies, they're like, I'm going to be different.
Right.
And they don't know how to do it right.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for them, like to take sort of the good and discard the sleazy used car salesman stuff?
Yeah. It's a good question. One, I rarely see anyone who's kind of the sleazy type. It's popularized in our collective imagination as the seller. I got to tell you, one of my bigger challenges is getting people just to say, hey, Ruben, do you want my help? Do you want to do business with me? There's a lot of, hey, let me know if you want me to follow. I'll follow up with you later. What do you want to do? So, one, I don't think people need to worry about that as much because there are very rarely people who are that aggressive in sales for probably our listeners. Right?
And if they are, they're going to get pushback. They're going to know.
Yeah, they're going to get pushback, and some of them kind of fight through it. But I think let's pretend we're dealing with a very transactional sale. We're going to do a one-call close. It's rare, but if we had that, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to be better on the phone. They need to sound good. And that's their tone, their warmth, their pace. They need to ask good questions. And then just let people know, hey, at the end of this call, we're going to determine if it's a fit or if it's not.
Sure.
They're going to set that up. They're going to prime the buyer. Now, if it's a longer sales cycle, what we find is you have multiple opportunities to demonstrate credibility and trust throughout that sales cycle because, I don't know about you, but my sales cycles are anywhere from a one-call close to several months. It just depends on the type of engagement. And over that period of time, there are multiple touch points to demonstrate that you do what you say you're going to do, and people are collecting those data points in their head.
Sure.
All right, hey, said he would do this, said she would do this, she did it, right? Said she'd send this, she sent it. Told me she was going to ask this, she did. Said this part was going to be uncomfortable or that I wasn't going to like it, and they followed through. And so they're starting to realize, I think I can trust you.
And whether or not they're explicitly thinking this, our minds just have evolved that way.
Right.
They're always thinking this way.
Yeah. And the other thing I would encourage people who are going to sell to do is throw out all the sales books. Don't worry about those because I'm going to tell you, I can count on one hand the number of people I've met who've read a book on some sort of systematic selling or strategy who actually employ it regularly.
Okay.
They go and read Spin, and Spin's phenomenal. No one can do Spin, right? If your people are selling lodging, for instance, they probably don't need Spin. They need to be able to have a good conversation and ask for the business. But I would tell people, go and study psychology. Go and study body language. Go and study, if you can, get into an improv class. All of these things are skills that are transferable across multiple disciplines inside of a business, but they're going to help you because you're just dealing with people for now until the Terminators come and take over.
Right. So, apparently Benioff is announcing they're going big into AI. So
I'm so terrified. I'm so terrified. I'm the only one, me and Elon Musk.
Now, you're a guy who's a big believer in sales process, and you've written a book, and you're saying, do some improv, don't worry about the process, don't read any books.
Right.
Help me reconcile those 2 points of view.
So I believe you learn a process, but most people go and read a 300-page book, and the book is this structure that is, for most people, too complex. There are a few systems, ours being one of them, and I feel it's like simple enough for people to learn. And ours was based on buyer psychology. So the reality is I've seen a lot of people be really successful without having a system. When they got our system, now they just had a language and a process or framework for what they were doing, right? They had ways to connect with people, and that's important. What a lot of us are struggling with is, hey, I'm not comfortable talking to people. How do I build a relationship really quickly?
Right.
How do I read the other person? especially when I'm doing a presentation. How do I focus not just on the words I'm saying, but the interaction? So I believe you need a process. I think you develop it, you can get somebody else to develop it, but try to avoid all the books because there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of garbage. And you know what you see when you're in airports? You see sales books.
Right.
Because it's salespeople running through. Somebody's got to keep all those writers employed. But just go to a different section of the library. Now, we wrote a book, and I'll tell you how we thought about it differently.
Okay.
We believed there were plenty of how-to books out there, and we didn't want to write a how-to, right? Because you got a how-to on everything. And I think those are valuable and they have their place. What we wanted to do was talk to people like you and me who'd made major breakthroughs or changes in themselves as they sold, and we wanted to chronicle what they went through, the big choices they made in doing that. So you titled this Sales for Nerds. There are at least 2 to 4 people in the book, as I'm thinking about it, who are in software companies who are developers.
Okay.
And they had to learn to sell. And so they share their story about, hey, here are my challenges. Here's what I had to go through mentally and emotionally. And that's what we wanted to give people is, hey, here's the process people went through. They had a deep desire to succeed. They were willing to do what it takes. They had the commitment and the desire to change. And so they went through. But it wasn't easy. It was uncomfortable. They had to re-script some of what we call their head trash.
Right.
But they did that. So that's what we wanted to offer people. And so our book was hopefully to be some encouragement to people that you can make the change if you want to.
Okay. All right. This is going to give me some encouragement to pull it out of the
and I got to tell you, it's a
Kindle.
real quick read. It's too thin to kind of be a doorstop, but you can add it to a stack of books that if you're trying to hold the book. And the chapters probably take you 8-10 minutes to read.
Well, that's what I like. I hate people who feel like they have to write a 300-page book just to get me to buy it, but it's really 50 pages.
Yeah. Ours is probably, it's a series of, I'm not going to call them case studies, but essentially that's what they are. They're stories of people, entrepreneurs and owners, CEOs, salespeople, sales managers. And hey, here are some of the things I went through. And there's a great story there. There's a guy named Matt we worked with, and he tells a story about sitting down with a prospect who basically said, hey, I don't know why you're here. You know, I don't know why you bothered coming to see me, this, and this about the product. And Matt was frustrated because he'd come all the way there and he'd been through this and he got up to leave. And he said, well, I guess we're done. And the guy said, where are you going? He said, well, you said we don't have anything to talk about. And the guy said, you sit down, boy. And Matt, in his mind, made a decision. At that moment, he said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to get my questions answered. And he said he left with either a $500,000 or $1 million deal from that because he sat with the guy and just got the guy talking. But it was a big moment for him. And he said he went and sat in his car and just laughed. He said, that was so much fun. I can't wait to do this again.
So it was like he had swung and he hit a home run, and now he wants to play baseball.
Yeah, it just, mentally there was a shift for him. It's what he had to go through.
And it kind of goes back, I think, in some ways to what you were talking about at the beginning, where he was like, I don't have this deal. I'm going to get up and leave.
Right. What do I have to lose, right? I'm going to get out of here. And the guy said, sit down. Well, if he says sit down, there's a reason he wants you there.
Right.
And that's what we've got to be attuned to.
So, read your book.
Mm-hmm. I think you should. I mean, there are a lot of great books, and I'm a reader. The nerds may appreciate this. I'm listening to a book on Area 51 right now.
Okay.
So that I just love that stuff. But I'm always trying to listen to something or read something. Read our book. We think it's really good. Obviously, I think it's light. It's not heavy, and it'll give people some tools and some thoughts on overcoming the mental part of the game.
Which I think is, like, if you show up at the plate knowing you're going to strike out, you're probably going to strike out. This much I remember from baseball.
Yeah.
You show up thinking you're going to do something, you might actually do something.
Right.
And it's funny you mentioned these books that are just too complicated because I've read so many sales books, and they all have some good nuggets in them.
Yeah. But you want the nugget in a white paper. You don't want to read up 200 pages to get there.
Right, and you want it like in your CRM system or whatever so you can actually do it.
Right.
You don't want to sit there and have to distill it and figure out...
And create a new habit for yourself.
Right.
Which is even harder.
So habits. How do you create new habits?
Oh, gosh. For your readers, if this were a website, I'd create a link to this guy's page and just hopefully create some sort of back loop and I'd get paid on it.
All right.
Great book by a guy named Charles Duhigg called The Power of Habit.
Okay.
And he talks about this. So I encourage people to read at it. It's got some great case studies, but it's real readable. right? He's one of these guys who can write. I think you have to say, I've got no option behavior. This is something I have to engage in daily. We all shower at least somewhat semi-daily. I know there's some people out there who don't, but it's just something we decide we're going to do.
Right.
And then you get to a point you don't even think about it. Like right now, you and I, we both brush our teeth morning, afternoon, maybe middle of the day. Getting my 3-year-old to brush her teeth every day, it's like, oh my gosh.
But you got to build a new habit.
You got to build a habit in her. And then Duhigg makes the point that I think 40% of who we are is just our habits. Mm-hmm. We do it unconsciously. So some of the things are developing habits when you're with prospects. Asking why is a big one. Asking it over and over again. But prospecting is something that, as unpopular as it is, I encourage people to figure out a way to do that. Make it a habit. Now, if you're lucky enough to be able to have someone to delegate that to, whether it's some sort of marketing automation or marketing system, there just has to be a habit of reaching out and touching people to get them to say, hey, I see what you're doing over there.
Right.
And then I think you build in, if you've got a CRM and there are great people I can refer people to do the implementation, set your CRM up the right way.
Right.
Because it will support habits. So our CRM is set up such that it forces me to do certain things, or at least check off the box and lie, but I'm not going to do that. But it's like, I got to go do that. And so I got to make sure that I put that into my process. So that's one way to do it. I've been playing with an app called, I think, Habit List.
Okay.
It's like $3 or $5. And you plug in your habits and you just mark off every day if you've done them.
Yep.
I've not made it a good habit of using it, but I'm trying. I aspire.
That's the ultimate cheat, right?
Right.
You just don't open the app.
Don't open the app.
It's funny because I think this all kind of ties together with what you're saying earlier, that when people get into sales, they're like, oh, crap.
Right.
Let me go read some sales books.
Right.
And I remember the first book I bought was called Selling Microsoft. Because back then they were the thing.
They were.
And it's just, am I dating myself here? And I remember
they're still in business, you know.
Yeah, they're still like the 5th most valuable company on the planet.
Yeah.
But they're not feared the way they used to be. I had so many little Post-it notes in this book. This was like the book. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it was great if you were selling enterprise software to Ford or whatever. Right. And for me, selling consulting with like a couple of employees, it was the stupidest thing I could have done.
Well, you didn't know better. So
I didn't.
So just take it easy on yourself. I encourage people to kind of learn some basics. So when I work with companies and I have to go in-house to train, we focus on one thing at a time. Like, learn how to talk about your company differently than other people. Get what we call a 30-second commercial. And then get good at that. And I don't know if you played video games in the 80s when they were kind of like the new thing. It was really about, can I get to the next level?
Right.
And I tell people sales is a lot the same. Early on, just see if you can get to the next level. Right? Don't measure yourself on whether or not you're closing deals. Now, obviously, if the company depends on it, that's one thing. But just see, can I get a little bit further? So learn a good commercial. Learn how to set expectations for the next step and set the next meeting.
Right. Learn
in that meeting to uncover some compelling issues. Learn how to get access to a decision maker. But very often, people make it really complex because it keeps a lot of consultants employed.
Sure.
So we sound smart.
Well, and some of those people, right, they do consulting for these giant companies where it makes sense to try to do this training and get 3% more.
Right.
But then they publish the books that the rest of us read, and they go on CNBC or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so we all think that that's how we're supposed to be doing it, when it's actually like flying a space shuttle, when you just need to get in your Honda and go where you need to go.
Yeah, we're not building rockets here.
So for the folks who are saying, gosh, this is all pretty useful. I wish I had learned this, in my case, maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe for someone else just starting out 3 months ago.
Right.
If they're trying to put together kind of a playbook or a process or whatever it is, at some simple level, is there a resource that they should go to? Is there a way they should think about it that will let them go off and construct this for themselves in an afternoon or a week or whatever?
Let me tell you a quick story. I was talking to a company we work with, and I was telling them, because they do a lot of e-commerce, and I won't talk about what they sell here. It's pretty funny. Not unethical, it's just funny. And I remember talking to the sales manager and asking about certain types of data, because you need data to make decisions and adjust what you're doing. And I said, do you have a CRM? He said, no. I said, where do you keep this stuff? He said, Google Docs. I said, you need a CRM. He said, yeah, but when we look at the price per seat and the customization that's going to be involved, our CEO thinks we got to just do it ourselves. Now, I'm not a master chef. No one's, thinking I'm Bobby Flay. But there's a difference between cooking a good steak and making a chocolate torte.
Okay.
Just because you're a good grill master doesn't make you a pastry chef.
Okay.
And so what happens is a lot of people try to reinvent the wheel. And there's a need and a desire to be unique, just to come up with it yourself. And the reality is most people, I learned a good lesson from an entrepreneur once. And he said, look, if it's not core to your business, if it's not your key success factor, outsource it. Now, I'm not saying you should outsource sales. Some people should.
Right.
But some people, go find someone, whether it's an entrepreneur, whether it's a great sales leader, whether it's someone like us, and get them to help you do it, because they'll take that learning curve and they'll shorten it. And there are guys in our book, and some of them have referred people to us, and some of them have just told people, here's what you should do.
Right.
Or go read this and implement it. Don't try to figure it out on your own, because that's time that you're not seeing customers. That's time you're thinking about something that really someone else can solve for you in a lot less time.
Right.
They're just, if I wanted to write a piece of code, I'm better off hiring a guy who's got your skill set than I am learning code myself.
That's a great analogy that hopefully will make sense to people.
I hope, right?
I still remember when I was working at a software company, and one of the sales guys asked, I'd like to get a little better at writing code so I understand what we're doing here.
Right.
What should I do to go figure out how to do that? And someone shouted out, get a 4-year degree.
Right. That's pretty funny.
Which, we all laughed, and it was kind of like, but I think the same is true on the sales side, and we want to ignore that, and we want to pretend that we're going to figure it out. And I think the irony that I find is so many people are saying, I don't want to hire someone to figure out this sales process, or to use someone else's sales process. I need my own unique sales process. Well, what makes your company unique? And there's a blank.
Right.
Like, go spend your time on that,
Right.
and have someone else plug in the sales process. You can always tweak it later.
Absolutely. And the reality is, it's like, if you get 80% of the way there, that someone can do in an hour or 2 or 3, you're going to spend months, maybe years, trying to figure that out.
Or never get there.
Right. So just have an expert help you. And an expert could just be your neighbor who's in a similar industry.
Right.
Right? Just copy their playbook, tweak some things. Don't spend weeks and weeks and weeks trying to figure it out.
Right.
Spend time figuring out how to satisfy your customer.
Follow my strategy. Bring a bottle of wine to the smartest sales guy you know.
Well, we got to get a larger sample size for us, because there are a lot smarter guys than I am. It's great wine, by the way. So
yeah, it's really opened up nicely.
Yeah.
If you like a French Pinot Noir, this is I don't know where I got this. I'm guessing it was probably at Costco. It's probably like $15.
No, it's great. I mean, the heavier alcohol they just kind of scorch your mouth, and so I've really kind of gone more toward the French wines. I am not a vinophile, so I love good wine, but if I want to be able to walk later in the day, I got to go and start lighter with the alcohol content.
Well, and again, this is kind of the impetus behind this podcast, right? We're here. I'm not going to say exactly when in the afternoon, but it's before 5 o'clock.
Yep.
And we're enjoying a bottle of Burgundy. So I feel like life is good.
This is a good life. Yeah, we got small problems.
And hopefully it's useful to other people as well. Because otherwise, it's
that's my hope. Well, good, Ruben. This has been great.
Cheers. For folks looking for some of the stuff we talked about, look in the show notes. And thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next time on Sales for Nerds. Adam, thanks so much.
Absolutely.